So joining me today is former Wake County First Assistant District Attorney Howard Cummings. Now he's in private practice, but he spent 35 years as a prosecutor, which is pretty unusual. In that time, he prosecuted many high-profile cases. Many of them I covered, so I got to see him in action firsthand. And one of the things, Howard, I would say I always admired about you was just how steady and calm you were, no matter what was happening, inside or outside the courtroom. I also got to see how much you cared about getting justice and also cared about the families. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the program.
Well, thanks, Amanda. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for
Tell-
the compliments.
They're well deserved. You spent many years as a prosecutor. It's a very stressful job. A lot of people burn out on that job pretty quickly. What was it about that job that kept you there for so long?
I think it was the new and different cases that came through. I was not carrying a regular caseload of the garden variety cases. Frankly, I got to pick and choose in what I did. And so when something came through that I wanted to do, that I was interested in, and I thought maybe I could um, develop some new skills, because the law is changing and technology is changing, and there are just new things to be done. And I think that was part of it.
Now you're in private practice, very different, I would imagine, but I'm assuming you also had a skill set from being a prosecutor that you now use in your defense work.
Um, yeah, and it's really analyzing things, looking at the evidence that you have and deciding what you can do with it. Did defense work before I started those 30 years as a prosecutor, so I'd already been on what some people would call the other side and feel like that I understood both sides and I understood um, how those that are accused think and react, and that allowed me um, to try cases as a prosecutor. And now it allows me to defend cases because I like to think that I know what the prosecutor's thinking about.
Yeah, I would imagine it would definitely inform you on both sides, having that experience. So you handled so many cases, high profile cases that I covered. One that sticks out to me involved a man named Jason Young. The victim was his wife, Michelle Young. And this was a case that garnered a lot of media attention, went on for a very long time. Do you remember being told that a pregnant woman's battered body had been found in a home in Wake County?
I recall that. It was a case from the sheriff's department, and I recall that it occurred and that there was a child that was found at the scene and a sister involved, and the sheriff's department was very interested in making some progress really quick.
Yeah,
Um,
and talk about that child. I know that was a pretty big deal because that's very rare for somebody to be left alive at a crime scene like that. And there was evidence that the child may have actually been up at some point near the mother's body and then been put to bed.
right, right. Well, there were when Michelle's sister uh, got to the house and found Michelle deceased, she was calling out for the child, and the child was hiding under the covers. Um, there were footprints that matched the child to show that, or indicated that the child had walked through the blood at some point in time and been in a bathroom for a while at some point in time. Yet, when the child was found, her feet were washed. So it sort of indicates some care for the child, which begins to point things in a certain direction. Um, and later on, there were things that the child acted out sort of in her daycare center, which were important later on.
You mentioned her sister, Michelle's sister. I know right away it's important as a prosecutor to get information, as much information as you can about the victim. And so you develop a relationship with the family. And so you did so with Michelle's mother and sister. Did they have a theory early on in the case about what was going on?
They did have a theory. They knew that there were some marital problems. I think the sister had tried to sort of mediate that a little bit and help that along. Um, and they knew a lot of things about Jason's personality and the way that he behaved in public and in private that nobody investigating the case knew that. Um, and then based on his reaction, he wouldn't discuss it with the mother and the sister. He wouldn't say anything and was acting inappropriately. So they immediately came to sort of an idea of his responsibility. And of course, that never changed. Um, and there was nothing I ever saw to change the prosecution's avenue.
And, I know really quickly they wanted to talk to him, and the sheriff's investigators called him. I believe he was in the car. He said he was on his way to his parents' house, that he had been on a business trip in the mountains several hours away when this had happened. And really, I think other than that phone call, he pretty quickly got an attorney and wouldn't talk to you guys. And I remember you even saying in court, not talking to authorities doesn't mean you're guilty, but it surely raises red flags because if something happens to someone you love, you would think you would try to give them every piece of information you could to help solve the case.
That's the thing that stood out to me was that he wasn't in any way trying to assist or help with the investigation. He provided no information on what had been going on. Of course, the truth of the matter is it was a kind of information that he would not want to divulge, but not asking any questions, not checking in. How is this going? I mean, the sister and the mother were constantly contacting the sheriff's department. Are you making any progress? What's going on? Jason never made any inquiry, either through himself or through any kind of third person. And that was like, that's a red flag of many red flags.
And so quickly you're focusing on him, the investigators are focusing on him. And so what you have to do is poke holes, right, in that alibi, which was pretty detailed. I mean, he said, I'm at this hotel, I'm very far away. There's no way I could have done this. Again, he's not saying that to you directly, but he's saying that through his attorneys. And
Right.
so you start really basically picking apart every little action and figure out that there were a lot of holes in that story, correct?
Yeah, correct. And one of the things was the amount of time that we thought might have taken him from traveling uh, from just outside of Raleigh up to where he spent the night in Virginia. And we found not only that was that trip doable, that is a round trip in the middle of the night, but that he actually stopped at a gas station um, and had sort of an encounter with a very pleasant clerk that was in there, and she identified him as coming in, being in there in the middle of the night, being in a hurry, uh,
Paying
not
cash. Yeah.
paying cash, and not being tolerant of the fact that the pumps might not be on at whatever time in the middle of the morning it was. Um, and she came back down here and identified him as that person.
That was
Uh,
Gracie. I remember that.
yeah,
And there were other things at the hotel, a door possibly propped open, a security camera turned off, things like that. But her testimony obviously was very strong. We talked a little bit about the child. There was evidence that she had been drugged with cough medicine, correct? to have her sleep until somebody was able to come get her.
right? And that certainly doesn't indicate that it's some third party intruder. It indicates that it's someone who cares for the child. And once again, that points to Jason.
Now, one of the things you really focused on at trial, and actually there were two trials, and we'll get to that in a minute, but the first trial, you really focused on the infidelity because we're not talking garden variety infidelity. We're not talking, of an affair. We're talking many, many affairs. And you were able to get a lot of women to get on the stand and talk about this. I mean, that had to be hard to do. These were not all local people, they were from different parts of the country. I could see people saying, I don't want to be part of this. Like, I don't want to talk about this. I mean, how did you get them to do that?
Well, there was one from Texas who had actually been engaged to him at one time. And I think that she was, although she still had some semblance of a relationship with him, I think she was eager to help. There was another one from out west, maybe Montana or Colorado, lived in the mountains there. And she did not want to come, but she did. Um, we have some folks in our office that were very adept at talking to witnesses and making them understand that justice needs to be done. That is, the truth needs to be told, and that their testimony and the evidence they present would be important. And there was another one from Florida that we had evidence that Jason had been down there to see the girl in Florida. And we had evidence that one of those girls had come up and spent the night at Jason's home while Cassidy was there, while Michelle was out of town. So we knew those things about them. And I think they came forward to do the right thing.
And, I've heard investigators and probably you and other prosecutors say before, again, infidelity doesn't equal killing your spouse. Plenty of people are unfaithful and don't kill their spouses. But this rose to a different level. I mean, this was what I would call serial infidelity.
Yeah, I mean, there was a girl that came forward that was involved with Jason before he and Michelle ever got married while they were dating. It just happened to be a girl in the neighborhood. Um, it, as you say, in and of itself, it doesn't mean anything, but it presents in such a way that because it's dishonest, it's a form of dishonesty, and so that's where um, that was important. That's one of the reasons that we did it, just to show, he'd say, I love her to death. I love Michelle. I'm looking forward to having another child because she was pregnant at the time she was killed. Yet he was not interested in being married, if the truth be known.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty shocking just the amount, I think, of infidelity, that came out in the courtroom. Another piece of evidence that you talked about a few minutes ago, but I think bears getting a little bit more into, was the daycare teacher. So the daycare teacher had witnessed the child with Barbies, I guess, two dolls, a Ken doll and a Barbie doll, acting out some kind of a violent scenario, and that turned into something that you were able to use in the courtroom. Talk about that a little.
It's something that was not used during the first trial because it we weren't sure how important it would be and how it came across, but we decided to use it in the second trial. And it involves dolls, it involves a doll house, it involves a doll house that has a second story. And so there's this little teeny bed on the second story, and she's acting out having a female doll, hair color very similar to Michelle's, and then a male doll on top of her and slapping like that. And in our mind, she witnessed it or some part of
And that's really hard. You can't put a child that age on the stand because she was what, under 3.
it, right?
So that was the next best thing to have that information.
And
And
actually, the teacher saw that. Of course, the child didn't testify, but the
right, of course, that's what I mean. The
saw
next
that,
best thing was having that teacher share
right?
that information. Again, you mentioned the 2 trials. So the first trial kind of had a curveball. Jason took the stand. Very unusual. You do not have that often in a murder case. And he did what you said. He got up there and said, "Well, I did all this bad stuff, but I loved my wife."
Right.
And, he said it with a smile. How were you guys ready for that? I mean, did you expect him to take the stand?
You know, our office did not expect that. I had actually gotten involved with another matter, another case that I had tried just the month before. So um, someone stepped in to assist in the prosecution of Jason, and Jason had never said anything before about anything. But of course, by this time, he knows what the state's evidence is. And so he basically got up there and admitted that he was not a good father, not a good husband, but I love my wife and I love my daughter. And then he went on to explain or try to explain away what bits and pieces of the state's evidence were. Kind of like at the hotel where the cameras were turned and um, explaining that, trying to explain away why the door would have been propped open at the motel to say that he went out to smoke a cigar. Just the things that the state had lined up as evidence against him, he took the opportunity to explain those away at that point, which was so many days, thousands of days after this murder, before he ever testified. And right, it was not expected.
And that trial ended in a mistrial. Do you think it was because he took the stand? In other words, was it because there was one juror or whatever who just believed him?
Well, I don't know whether they believed some part of what he had to say or whether that just muddied it up enough that 12 people couldn't be unanimous, which is a difficult proposition when you have just a lot of circumstantial evidence. If you're going to use half circumstantial evidence and it's great evidence, it needs to gel into a picture. And sometimes the picture's not as clear as you want it to be.
So you tried him again, and this time, ironically, you were able to take parts of that testimony and kind of use it against him. In other words, you were ready now. You were able to look at it and say, okay, this is inconsistent with, the story. This doesn't work. And he did not take the stand. He was convicted, sentenced to life in prison. Did you feel like justice was served in this case finally after all the time?
Absolutely. Um, it was a very vicious murder. Obviously, one done by involved great passion because of the 30 some wounds that had been afflicted. The family, the mother and the sister of Michelle had just been put through so much um, that it was just a justice was done, and now there's some closure.
Yeah, and I guess one of the hardest things probably as a prosecutor is that no matter what you do, you're not bringing back the loved one, and that family has a void forever, even if justice is served.
That's right.
It's a,
Fortunately, the daughter has done very well, been to college and just done very well, and we're all grateful for that.
and had a lot of support from the rest of the family, which is
Sure. Oh, yes. So much support.
which is really important. Well, Howard, thank you so much for talking about this really difficult case, and I appreciate your insight.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.